Chapter 6. I opened my eyes. People were yelling and running. I jumped out of my sleeping bag and shoved my feet into my shoes. Grasping my coat to my neck, I stepped out of my shelter. The first thing I saw was men with torches setting fire to the tents. Then a soldier, his clothes in flames, ran past me down to the river and threw himself in. The camp was under attack, smoke was everywhere, and the night was broken by panic and screams. I stumbled backwards. George. I needed to find George. "Timothy!" I cried. I clamped my hand over my mouth. I'd meant to say George. I know I had meant to say George, so why hadn't I said George? An arm in a rough sleeve hooked my neck. The owner of the arm was a bearded man wearing a plaid jacket, marking him immediately as a robber and a Westie. I protested as loud as I could, but he didn't seem fazed by my noise. He hauled me uphill, where we came to a line of horses steaming in the light of more torches. Timothy and Richard were already there, and before long I found my wrists tied together and tethered to a growing line of prisoners, with Richard being my nearest neighbor. "Welcome to the party," he said to me. "Oh, be quiet," I said hotly. I started twisting my wrists, trying to get free, but the rope had been tied expertly. "Why did you throw the box in the river?" Timothy demanded. "Yeah, what were you thinking?" Richard asked. I fumed. Did I get wakened and denied yet another good night's sleep for this? "I had every right to throw that thing in. It wasn't yours." "I never said it was," Timothy answered. "Well, why did you take it then?" "That was not your concern. You made it my concern when you handed me the box and told me to run." Our conversation was cut short with the appearance of George. Ropes were wound round his wrists, and then he was attached next to me. "Doesn't feel so good, does it?" Richard asked George. There was blood dribbling down the side of his head, but he only scowled. "Who are these men?" "Robbers from the North Hills," Timothy answered. "Western outlaws, the kind the sheriff was telling you about back at Red Cliff's camp." George turned to me. "Are you all right, Lisbette?" I was about to respond that I'd been better, but Richard quipped up to say, "Oh, she's just fine. Having a great holiday, aren't you, Lisbette? Glad you came now, Lisbette?" "Knock it off, Richard," Timothy said. "You can knock it off, too," George said to Timothy. "You've gotten Lisbette into enough trouble as it is, bringing her out here on false pretexts when she thought you were just escorting her home." "She had every chance to stay in Audleton," Timothy said. "Ask her if you don't believe me." "Still, you didn't exactly mention that you were carrying stolen goods when you agreed to take her. Did you ever stop to think that you might have put her in danger?" "I did everything I could to convince her to take the boat. Obviously, you didn't try hard enough." "You think it was his fault that she came?" Richard said. He nodded to me. "Why don't you ask her how she bullied Timothy into coming with us?" "Shut up, Richard," Timothy and I said in unison. "Would it interest you to know that these two are betrothed?" Richard said to George. George looked down at me. "Betrothed?" I sighed. "Only in name. In 1 week we'll both be free." "I think that's something you should have told me earlier," George said. "What difference does it make?" I said, testing the strength of my ropes again. "Difference?" George asked. "If you're that close with Easton here, then how do I know you didn't help steal the box?" I looked up. "George, after knowing me for nearly 3 years, do you really think I'm a thief?" Whether he did or did not was left unsaid. The last of the soldiers were being compelled up the hill. As for the remainder of George's men, I could only hope that they had been able to escape. A man with a torch came to look us over. He was an ugly man with a heavy fur vest over a soiled rugby shirt. His misshapen head was shaved, and he had tattoos up and down his neck. "Not bad, not bad." "Who are you?" George demanded. "You can call me Oswald, soldier." "My name is Captain Hargrove. Why have you taken us?" Oswald leaned close to George and whispered, "Listen, can you hear that?" "Hear what?" said George, trying to pull back. I didn't blame him. The smells coming from the man were positively acidic. With eyes glowing from the torchlight, Oswald pointed into the darkness. "It's these hills. They're on fire with rumors. Been on fire all day. They say that a treasure's been smuggled and that the royal family has sent you soldiers to bring it back. So I said to my men, why aren't we out treasure hunting too? Now, who wants to tell me what the treasure is?" He waited, but again no one answered. "Clive," Oswald sang out, "am I a patient man?" From somewhere in the dark, Clive answered, "No, boss, you ain't. Show these people that I'm not patient." What happened next occurred so suddenly that at first my mind refused to understand what I was seeing. There was a soft whistle and a quiet thud. For a moment nothing seemed to have changed. But then I saw the arrow in the soldier at the end of the line. He was gazing down at it, a look of surprise on his face. He looked up at Captain Hargrove just before his knees buckled, and he fell to the ground. He didn't move again. "Now," Oswald said, "what's the treasure?" I was staring at the dead man. I had seen people die before, but that had always been from sickness or accident. Never had I seen a man murdered. "Clive," Oswald said. "It was the seal," I cried, my eyes still on the dead man. "What did you say?" Oswald said, turning sharply to me. "How do you know that?" Timothy asked. You said you didn't know what was in the box, George added. I opened the box. I confessed I saw what was inside. But it was locked, Timothy said. The box wasn't exactly made out of steel, I replied. But, Timothy started. Now all you shut up, Oswald shouted. Let the little lady speak. He came close to me, cupped my chin in his fingers. Now, why don't you tell me one more time what was in this box? It was a golden seal from the royal treasury. Oswald let out an incredulous sound and released my chin. The seal? You mean the king's own seal? I don't know about it being the seal, I said, trying to brush off any significance I could, at least not in the sense you're thinking. I mean, it seems highly unlikely that it was anything other than an antique or a museum piece, but it was gold, so I guess it's valuable. Now, was that so hard? Oswald asked us all. He rested his heavy hand on my shoulder. This little girl just saved your sorry lives. I hope you're properly grateful. Now, unfortunately, that seal seems to have fallen into the river, if I'm not very much mistaken. Now, normally, I don't like to waste my time fishing, especially this time of year when the water is oh so cold. But since you boys seem so good at it, you can start again tomorrow. He turned away and said to his men, put them in the truck. The truck, as it turned out, was actually an enclosed wagon, not far from where the horses stood. A door in the back was unlatched, and Timothy ordered in first. I had no choice but to follow Richard once he started after Timothy. I climbed the steps, trying not to let the rope connecting Richard and myself pull me faster than I was ready. At the doorway, I tried to look inside, but it was blacker than pitch in there. My heart began to beat fast as I climbed over the ledge and into the wagon, immediately using the little slack I had in rope. I put my hands out to find the walls. They were filthy, as if covered with dirt. I turned around to touch the other wall, but got shoved and stepped on as George and his soldiers started filling the already small space. I suppressed the groan that was growing inside of me. Already I was panting. My hands, still tied together, began to push nameless bodies to give myself more room to breathe. "Hey, what's the idea?" someone said, almost in my ear. "Who's pushing?" George demanded.